Look at this man. Society sees a man over 60 who stopped answering certain calls, stopped showing up to gatherings he used to attend out of obligation, stopped keeping in touch with people who once had easy access to his time, and society reaches for the same tired explanation. He's become bitter, he's isolating himself, maybe he's just a grumpy old man who's given up. Society is wrong. What you're actually looking at isn't a collapse. It's not depression, and it's not surrender. It's one of the most financially and emotionally disciplined decisions a man can make in his later years. A quiet, deliberate audit of exactly who and what deserves access to what he has left, his time, his energy, and yes, his money. Today we're going to explore why wise senior men cut people off, and why this has almost nothing to do with becoming cold, and everything to do with protecting a peace that took decades to build. Seneca wrote something that explains this shift perfectly. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. For most of his life, a man spends both his time and his money the way society trains him to, saying yes to obligations he never chose, lending to relationships that never intended to repay him, showing up for people who would never show up for him in return. Seneca's warning was never really about the clock. It was about the leaks, the small, constant ways time and money quietly drain out of a life through relationships and habits a man never consciously agreed to. By 60, a wise man has finally done the math. He understands there isn't an infinite supply of either resource left, and he stops spending both on people and situations that were never really worth the cost. There's real research behind why this happens so predictably as men get older. Psychologist Laura Carstenson's socio-emotional selectivity theory found that as people become aware their time is limited, they shift sharply away from expanding their social and financial circle and toward protecting what actually matters, emotionally and materially. A man in his 30s lends money to a struggling cousin because the relationship might pay off somehow, someday, in ways he can't yet predict. A man in his 60s has run that experiment enough times to know how it usually ends, and he's no longer willing to gamble his retirement on relationships that have already shown him who they are. There's also loss aversion at work, the well-documented tendency for the pain of losing something to hit roughly twice as hard as the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. A senior man who has been burned by an unpaid loan, a manipulative relative, or a friendship that only surfaced when money was involved doesn't need to be burned twice. He remembers the pain precisely, and he restructures his life to avoid repeating it. And Erik Erikson's final stage of psychosocial development, integrity versus despair, describes something crucial here. A man achieves integrity by aligning his remaining years with his actual values, rather than the obligations he once felt forced to carry. Financially, that means no longer funding relationships, habits, or expectations that don't reflect who he's actually become. Cutting someone off isn't cruelty. It's simply refusing to keep paying, in time or money, for a version of his life he's already outgrown. Think about the man who spent 30 years quietly lending small amounts to the same relative, every single time, believing this loan would be the last one. In his 60s, he finally stopped picking up the phone when that number called. Not out of anger, he'd simply run the numbers, literally and emotionally, and realized the relationship had never once been about him, only about what he could provide. Cutting it off wasn't bitterness. It was the first financially sound decision he'd made regarding that relationship in 3 decades. Think about the retired foreman who, for years, felt obligated to attend every work reunion, every former colleague's fundraiser, every social event tied to a career he no longer had any stake in, quietly writing checks and showing up out of guilt rather than genuine connection. Somewhere around 63, he simply stopped. He redirected that money and that time toward 2 grandchildren who actually wanted him there. Former colleagues called him distant. He calls it the best trade he ever made. Think about the man whose adult daughter, well-meaning but chronically disorganized with money, kept turning to him for just one more bailout every time a crisis appeared. He loved her deeply, and that love was never in question. But he finally drew a hard line. He'd help her build a budget, help her find resources, even help her once more with a clear, final boundary attached. But the open tap was closed for good. It wasn't rejection. It was the first real gift of accountability he'd ever given her, after years of accidentally teaching her that consequences were optional, as long as Dad was around. Think about the man who quietly stopped attending a monthly card game with 3 old friends after noticing, year after year, that he was always the one picking up the tab, always the one whose schedule bent to accommodate theirs, always the one extending grace that was never returned. He didn't announce it. He simply stopped showing up and discovered, to his own surprise, that he didn't miss it nearly as much as he expected to. Every one of these men shares the same quiet truth underneath their decision. He isn't afraid of losing people. He refuses to keep losing himself to keep them. None of this happens through a single dramatic confrontation. It happens through small, consistent decisions, repeated until the boundary simply becomes part of who a man is. He stops lending to relationships that have already shown him the pattern, because real wealth begins where the need to prove his loyalty ends. And there's no wealth, financial or emotional, in funding a one-way relationship indefinitely. He redirects his time and money toward the people who actually reciprocate, because money is a tool. Freedom is the goal, and freedom includes the freedom to choose who gets access to both. He stops attending obligations that drain him without asking permission first, because the wisest senior men protect their peace before they protect their reputation, and a reputation built on constant availability was never really peace to begin with. He keeps his circle small and fiercely protected, because a quiet, guarded life is often stronger than a wide, exhausting one, and there's more real security in 5 genuine relationships than 50 transactional ones. The next time you see an older man who's stepped back, who stopped showing up to gatherings he used to attend, stopped answering certain calls, stopped funding relationships that only ever took, don't assume he's broken. Understand that you're looking at a man who has finally finished the hardest financial and emotional audit of his life and closed every account that was never paying him back. The richest senior men rarely feel the need to prove their loyalty to people who never proved theirs. Seneca understood, 2,000 years before retirement accounts existed, that the real waste was never the years themselves. It was spending them on people and habits that quietly drained a man dry, one small concession at a time. A peaceful life is the greatest return on investment, and sometimes the wisest financial decision a man ever makes isn't in his portfolio at all. It's in his phone, deciding, once and for all, who still deserves to be in it. So we'd love to hear from you. Has there ever been a relationship or obligation you finally had the courage to step back from, and what changed once you did? Share it in the comments below. If this video resonated with you, give it a like, subscribe for more reflections like this one, and share it with another senior man who's ready to protect his peace. Seek wisdom, protect your peace, leave a legacy.